Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction tech or weekly Global Passive House Showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Well, welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from a bit of a soggy Auckland.
Yes, I am Zack Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington, which oddly is not soggy, but I think soggy is probably putting it mildly.
Bit of an understatement. Yeah, I kind of recall that we were talking about how the weather had sort of was starting to settle a couple of weeks ago, but I obviously spoke way too soon because a week ago, today's recording this, we had just record rainfall in a 24-hour period. In fact, so I grew up in Adelaide, as a lot of people know, in South Australia. We had in a 24 hours, we had half of the annual rainfall of Adelaide.
Wow.
Here in Auckland, just in that single day. So yeah, it was, and the soil was already quite saturated. The ground had quite a lot of moisture in it already. So that was what contributed to a lot of the surface runoff, flooding, and the net result of that is, as of a couple of days ago, nearly 400 homes around Auckland yellow stickered, which basically means they're a hazard. And getting up to 100, it may even be over 100 now, red stickered. Yeah, I think it is. It had reached 100 a couple of days ago, so that'll probably go up as well. So 100 means you can't go in there. And in fact, we know a few people have. It's pretty clear their houses will not just need relining, but probably be torn down. Which then also begs the question of whether those homes should be rebuilt in that same location, because while they're saying this is kind of a 1 in 200 year event, which is always misinterpreted as being, oh, now we've got another 200 years to wait till we see it again. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that if it's classed as a 1 in 200 event, that means that there's 0.5% every single year of it happening. As opposed to a 1 in 100 is a 1% chance of an event happening. But those percentages are always just based on historical data. So every time there's a number of these large events, that those numbers change, and there's just it could happen again next year. So they're just predictions and percentages.
Right. Right.
So
and all bets are off at this point.
All bets are off. There'll be a lot of analysis already done and more being done, and I suspect that the insurance industry will move a lot faster than any policy changes, but they'll be probably pretty swift in behind, and probably need to happen. So there will be a time for that. There's a lot of people in sort of crisis mode at the moment, and I feel very fortunate. And I know there are a lot of people in far worse situations than we were, with a little bit of water in our garage. So yeah, it's in fact a tragic event. There were some fatalities attributed directly to the flooding here.
Wow.
But there's going to be a massive impact ongoing to people's lives and disruption, economic disruption, and then of course it really does hit the building industry pretty hard as to what this looks like now for the months and possibly throughout the rest of this year to recover from this.
Wow, it's so intense. And you were comparing it to the aftermath from the earthquakes that happened not too long ago, right?
Well, yeah, over a decade ago now, the large earthquakes in Canterbury, which I think there are a lot of similarities because of that impact on insurance, but also it's to do with land and to do with where homes are safe to build and what type of homes and buildings and infrastructure should be built in those locations based on how we know that land and that location might perform in some future event. So yeah, it is going to, and already the financial impact is likely to be bigger than those, which is I think is pretty massive, because having lived through those Canterbury earthquakes, that was a pretty traumatic event. But because of the size of Auckland and the extent of flooding, it is going to be a pretty massive impact locally. I was also commenting that Auckland's just one city in one country around the world, and this is not, unfortunately, an uncommon incidence. Recently, and we've seen the massive floods, repeated floods down the east coast of Australia in the last 12 months or so. There've been the wildfires across the US and also other areas of storms. So, yeah, something's going on out there.
Yeah, it seems like it. And brings up the importance of resilience and the buildings that can kind of weather the storm quite literally.
Yeah.
But right, with flooding, there's just there's also a time when you wonder, okay, is it time to retreat? And as a way to adapt to a new reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. That's really intense. I hope everybody recovers quickly.
Yeah. People are pulling together. There's lots of really good news stories, as there often are in after these events, of communities stepping up and helping each other out, getting food to where it needs to go, and it was the massive cleanup. I mean, with water sodden stuff, there's just a lot of heavy lifting, and the longer that stuff stays around, the worse it gets. So there's a lot of people jumping in, and student volunteer army and people like that are going around and helping things deal with the immediate aftermath. And then there will also be, like I said, a lot of work after that to figure out how to fix up some of these buildings, which also presents some opportunities there in the relining and fixing up of these buildings, but also in potential rebuild of a whole bunch of buildings, and rethinking about how buildings are built in certain locations as well.
Sure.
So yeah. Yes, it's all happening. And of course, it has raised a lot of conversation. There's been a lot on social media this last week, and also in the news and other places about climate change and the reality that we're starting to see of these impacts. And I think it's heartening that people are more accepting, I think, of that's being a reality of climate change and the real impacts that we're starting to see, and that's going to hit us financially as much as anything else. It's not just greenies who kind of want to do the right thing now. This is impacting everyone.
A few decades ago, there was the analogy of the boiling frog, where if a frog in a slowly warming up pot, the idea is that the frog will not notice and stay and then die in this boiling water because it happens so slowly. And I think that there's some truth in that and some applicability to that in the way that we've reacted to the climate crisis so far. But I think that it's also true that people are quite aware that the water's getting warm. Hopefully will lead to more action. Yes.
But anyway, on to our interview for this week, because we've got a great one, and really keen to get into that. So let's do a quick shout out to our sponsors, and then we can get into the interview.
Yeah, let's do. So our founding sponsors are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minutair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our champion sponsors are Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, Proseco, and Source 2050. And our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. So a big thank you to all of those sponsors.
Thank you very much. All right. Tell us about our guest this week, Zack.
Well, Edie is co-founder and CEO of B.Public Prefab, and has been a mover and shaker and leader in the Passive House community for quite some time. She's also a really great communicator about Passive House, and has an arts background and kind of design background that she's brought to our world, and it has, I think, particularly been sharing those talents with Passive House Network as a board member of Passive House Network. So anyway, she's got lots of really interesting insights around prefab and around, being an entrepreneur in Passive House, the role of Passive House in decarbonization. We touch on another story of climate resilience with the fire, the Marshall Fire. It was really wonderful to get a chance to catch up with Edie. I have Edie Dillman here, co-founder and CEO of B.Public Prefab, and it's just a delight to have a chance to sit down and talk with you, Edie. Thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to see you, Zach. Yeah. Great to have this conversation. We're busy people. We don't generally get time, just the two of us.
I know.
This is really
I know. I think the last time we got to do this was almost 2 years ago at the Passive House Network conference in New York. And it was in a very loud space, but we were sitting right next to each other. So right now we're a little bit more distant, but it's quieter. So, and we get more time. So this is awesome. So I would love to start with your story for listeners, and how you got involved in prefab and in Passive House, if you wouldn't mind sharing that with us.
Thanks for asking. Yeah, it's a little bit of a circular story. And I think, interestingly, around, the Passive House Accelerator, I am one of the few folks who have lived in a certified Passive House for over 12 years. So
rub it in. Jeez.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, once you live in it and experience it, you really just want to share, that with folks. So you are very far away right now. Otherwise we could be there in my home office or around the kitchen table, and I could be showing that off. But really how I got pulled into this was my business partner and my husband was, I think, in the very first Passive House training. So he got involved, got stuck in the fish trap early and never looked back. And as a result, we designed a home for ourselves and an office. So technically we own the first condo that's Passive House, certainly in the US. And I think we're in the first, dozen or so buildings that were certified in the US by PHI. So that's one, is really experiencing what it means to use less, to be more comfortable, to close your windows and have fresh air circulating, even in fire or pollen season.
No kidding.
And, I think it's helpful that, Jonah, my husband, has had a practice and is an architect, and has been designing Passive House for all of that time. So for 12 or so years. And the company, B.Public, that we founded really came out of his struggle, that he had many, many clients who were ready for high performance, wanted better building for their new construction. And there's so few builders still trained to achieve Passive House. And so how do you move quickly and adopt? And of course, the solution that we've all agreed on is prefab. So that's sort of the evolution of the company, but it doesn't really explain why the heck I jumped into it. And I think it's helpful to know that I spent a lot of time in small business development. I've been an entrepreneur and I've supported entrepreneurs for a very long time. That's really my career trajectory. But directly before this work, I was working in education to workforce disruption and really looking at, where are we failing the system as a whole? So we're failing students because they're, racking up debt for college, and then they're not really getting hired, or they're not getting hired at a level that would repay that debt. And then on the corporate side, we're failing to train for what we actually need in the workforce. So I was doing work building the connectivity and really connecting those dots between higher ed or community colleges or trade schools and corporations of what they actually needed. And a lot of that work was building apps, building websites, building portals to connect those skills directly to the workforce. Really amazing work, but in that, discovering why building is so expensive in the US, right? We told people for 30 years to go to college, better yourselves, and we drained the trades and diminished the trades.
Yeah.
At the same time, we racked up a bunch of debt. So for me, knowing that and knowing that Passive House is a solution for so many things, energy conservation, health, you name it, and that there's a way to address the trades and create jobs at the same time we address the housing crisis. So it was like, okay, stop building apps. Let's go build jobs and build homes. So, it was one of those moments you can't not see that there's a role for me in this, and I have to stand up and get very uncomfortable and do something really wild. And fortunately, it's going well. So I jumped at the right time.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. I wasn't aware of that background that you brought to it. And it's, but there's a cool through line there where you're employing technology essentially in both these roles to kind of harness human capacity and talent more effectively in the world to make to make work happen. And that's cool that all these things are kind of crystallizing for you at B.Public. And I want to get into that deeper. But before we do, I'd also, you have a couple of really interesting board roles for nonprofits that I think also kind of point to this this interesting path that you've been on. I also have a really unconventional path to Passive House, so I feel like we're kindred spirits in that regard. But could you tell us a little bit about those two roles that you play?
I'm happy. Yeah, it's obviously I believe in service. I believe in change. So I've served on the Passive House Networks board for, I don't think I can count the years, a few years, let's say 3 or 4 years, right. Which is great. So moving, the education and marketing around Passive House forward. And then I've been serving quite a bit longer on an organization here. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there's an organization called the Santa Fe Art Institute. Mm-hmm. And it is not a university, although the name is deceiving. It is an artist residency program that for many years, I think we're 30 years old, originally was very sort of traditional artist residency that you would come, you would live at the Institute for a time, and you would paint or you do master classes. So very traditional. And I think it was 8 years ago, the board voted on two major decisions around that work. We had previously been charging people to come. So one, the board of directors said, no more tuition. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't believe what that did in terms of who was able to come and who started applying for these residencies.
Right.
And number two, and very importantly, the board voted to make it a thematic residency. And the themes are all around artist advocacy and disruption. And so we have had artists from around the world come to Santa Fe to live for a time from 3 weeks to 3 months on the subjects of immigration, emigration, water rights, food justice, labor. We just had a conversation about my interest in labor. Obviously, I was very interested in artists addressing the issues about equity, inclusion, disruption around labor. And we're currently in Revolution. And as a board member, I would vote to stay in Revolution for a very long time at the Art Institute.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. So check it out online. It's an amazing organization. There's lots of videos and podcasts with the artists, but these are people who are really, and I want to say artists in the way that we've had poets and lawyers in residency. And there's no demand to sort of produce or have a show. So it's like, what are these cohorts and what are they working on in terms of subject matter is really, really exciting. It's really cool stuff.
Sounds like it.
Thanks.
This is a couple of times now we've heard you say the word disruption. So and I think this is a good segue here. I mean, what is it? Edie Dillman, disruptor. So, but this is a good segue into B.Public, because that's also about disruption. And so could you just provide a little snapshot about what B.Public is doing, what you make, why? Yeah.
And I like being called a disruptor by somebody who's clearly a punk.
Solar punk. Yes.
Right. We could just like cue the music. We'd be fine.
Totally.
You and I would do just fine. So B.Public is a prefab component company. And it is a wood-based, fully insulated for the building envelope or the shell structure. We have a standard set of components. They're all wood-based and insulated with dense packed cellulose. We're using best-in-class weather barrier. Each panel is wrapped on 5 sides with a weather barrier, and the 6th side is air barrier. We provide walls, floor, and top panels. And certainly there are projects that don't use our floor panels because they're doing insulated slabs, like in California. But a really flexible system of standard components to build many, many different forms. So there are lots of folks in the passive house or even in the prefab world that are addressing custom panelization, where you're taking a full architectural plan and slicing and dicing it into your puzzle pieces. And we do the exact opposite. So we are offering a set of components like Legos or Jenga that you can design forms with and predictably hit performance. Another thing that we're really focused on changing and disrupting in our industry is that you can know from B.Public what the cost of that high performance envelope will be for your project within a week. So we're offering not only sort of the design of a standard component envelope, we're also able to offer a predictable cost of that and iterate that estimate as a project gets closer and closer to order or install. So we're trying to offer, a higher performance beyond code performance, vapor open, thermal bridge free, you name it, to those sort of passive house measures, but also being able to count those pennies up front in planning a project, working with consumers direct, doing single family homes, working with developers doing multifamily homes, working with, community development folks like Habitat for Humanity, looking at the envelope as a way to speed construction, shorten that, build time significantly in some cases. In New Mexico, we build very slowly, stick frame. So cutting 30% of a build time, certainly saving on waste because we're not cutting ends on site, and being able to deliver and install structures in just a few days.
Yeah.
And then moving on.
Right.
That's the goal, is just high performance and then pass it back to the local builders and let them complete. So we're working across some primary markets, a lot of work in Colorado, New Mexico, certainly, California. And then we've got really wonderful pilot projects in North Carolina and upstate New York and Massachusetts, which will be our secondary markets as we grow.
That's quite a geographic reach. That's cool. I have a very kind of like kind of building science related question, and then a broader question. So the building science one is, you mentioned 5 sides have the weather barrier, and one side has air barrier. So that's the 5 sides would be the exterior, the top, the bottom, and the sides, I assume, and the air barrier is the inside. So you're doing that in order to ensure that it's really robust once it's stitched together, I assume. Yes, or can you say about that?
It's not just, yeah, absolutely. It's not for us. And we try and think, through complexity, and reduce as much risk in building as possible. And for us, we know these panels are going to move more than once, right? They're going to go from shop floor onto a truck, get hoisted and lifted off, staging on site, and then lifted again. So, part of it is, yes, the long-term, once installed robustness of our panels, but it also, these things are going to have to move, and it's really great to have them protected from the weather somewhat. Of course, we want to, not have them out in the weather exposed, but it's really around that. It's the whole life cycle for us of those panels, and can we ensure the security and delivery of them in the same way, we have dense pack cellulose blown in there to 4.5 pounds per cubic foot. One, of course, is we're removing that air movement through a wall. This is a high performance wall. Once it's standing, we want it to be permanent. We don't want to see any loss in density. But it's also because we're going to pick up and move them. We don't want stuff moving around. So, it's win-win for us that all of those things align with being able to move these and bring them to site. And obviously on air barrier on the interiors of vapor open membrane. But for our floor panels, it's standard subfloor, right? It's wood. That's your air barrier. And so we're taping that as well. These are very noble materials. We're just using them somewhat to the nth degree for greatest benefit.
Yeah, well said, well said. So the bigger question, and you touched on this a little bit, but we've got this really critically important project of building decarbonization, and we need to do it as fast as possible. So why is prefab important in that project?
Well, for us, it's rapidly renewable and thoughtful small wood is important to us. By weight, I think the dense packed cellulose is 80% of our panels by weight. That's great. It's all somewhat recycled. I think most of our supply right now is 86% post-consumer recycling. So really important. And this is really fun to talk about. We may not always, as at B.Public, use dense packed cellulose. I hate to say it, you and I both have been in media. Newspapers and magazines are still going away. So as an assembly, what's important to us is the performance. So what are the performance measures that we're designing to? What is our standard? Which you and I can have a conversation about, that it's passive house, but it's also the B.Public standard is what's the best material choice we can make. So we are looking at and exploring what will be the next source. There's a great company that's taking Amazon boxes and making dense pack cellulose. Seems like Amazon is going to continue to do fairly well for a while. Great. We've got lots of cardboard.
Yeah, we have plenty of cellulose to replace newspapers.
Right?
For
Fantastic.
sure.
That's really, really exciting. We talk with the hemp folks a lot. Hemp industry in New Mexico and the Southwest is growing. They'd love for us to be using hemp fiber. And certainly the folks at Hempatecture are kicking it. That is potential as well. So we will always be evaluating the upgrades, the changes, additional panel offerings in terms of really our carbon count. And it's really exciting. Canada looks at that more than the US. What I talk about in the long term is not just tax incentives or rebates, but each of our homes should be given cash carbon credits for all that we're sinking into the homes. That's where I think it's really exciting of like, let's really value the materials, where the source is, how renewable, and how far we have to truck it. So
right on.
Yeah.
Right on.
Thanks for the prompt.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Yeah. I'm here for you. I'm just lobbing them up.
Keep going.
So, well, here goes, because this is a perfect segue. You're talking about, like, you're basically talking a little bit about R&D, right? And you all have a brand new R&D manufacturing facility in Las Vegas, right?
Yeah, and it's the other Las Vegas. I have to say the original Las Vegas.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, explain that.
In New Mexico. It's in Las Vegas, New Mexico. So just an hour from Santa Fe and kind of on the road towards our clients up in Denver, which is great. We just took possession of an existing space. And for us, R&D is really important. And it's not just about the panels for us. It's about how to do things better. And you know, there's sort of that traditional R&D, let's test it, let's build it, let's rip it down, and then figure out how to manufacture it faster. For us, it's also R&Ding training and R&Ding, you know, our QC QA. We work with some really amazing partners in contract manufacturing. We're really dedicated to regional manufacturing, again, trying to support smaller businesses, but also get away from freight when we can. But we need to be able to R&D better systems, better ways to flip, hoist, fill, build panels, and consider new materials. So yeah, we've got this space. As much as I would like to make it a roller rink, we're putting in some good framing tables, and we've got a hoist, and yeah, it'll be really nice to have our staff do some hands-on. I am already getting contacted by some local universities that want to come and do sustainability training with us and look at what it is we do.
Cool.
So we hosted Mad Dash. We hosted the very first training for builder installers. So we've identified for B.Public, but also for the market as a whole of offsite and prefab, that there aren't a whole lot of people in the residential building world that have been trained to work with any kind of panelization. And add into the mix of that what we desire in subcontractors for install is high performance weather barrier tape, honoring that beautiful envelope, also knowing how to read an offsite set. This is news, right? The IECC just released last year the first of its kind offsite code. Nobody really knows what's in there. Builders don't know how to evaluate an offsite or a hybrid. For us, it's hybrid because it's just the envelope, and then the rest of the set is traditional. So we did a training for 2.5 days that covered intro to passive house, air barriers, materials. Our buddies from 475 came and did training. And then we had a live crane, and we built a demo house. So,
wow,
you know, we
cool.
invested in sort of this pod for training. It was named online. Thank you to one of our followers. Mini B is now standing in front of the space, but these 3 different GCs from around the country traveled to New Mexico to do this training. And at the end, there was a new structure standing with, you know, the floor panels, wall panels, window openings, headers installed, roof panel on. And they're ready to go. And they now safely know how to tell, you know, the crane operator to go up and down, which is
right.
pretty good, right? That seems basic, some good safety. So we'll repeat that, and I think we'll add to it, because now there's a desire of like, okay, so how do we do the high performance window and door install? What's the insulation? What's the taping? What's the air sealing on that? Great. Now we can tear down Mini B, rebuild it with another crew, and let's put in the windows and doors. And wouldn't it be great if the next thing we do is we're putting in ERVs, because we also don't have folks who know how to do that. So we've stepped into, you know, a very ambitious space, but we need to do this for our clients. We have so many projects coming up that are amazing. Traveling install crews are really busy, and we need to be able to offer local solutions to projects. And certainly we want to look at, like, can those teams work together on these bigger projects that we have coming? I mean, I just spoke to an amazing nonprofit developer this morning in Colorado. They want to do 30 homes.
Great.
That's a lot of people. We need to,
Yeah.
train to work on a crane to serve those style of projects. So the R&D studio, I think, is going to be really busy. And it will be manufacturing a project next month. So stay tuned on social media, because we love sharing these things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it'd be really fun to get down there with our video producer and capture one of these trainings at some point. So let's keep on chatting about that.
Love it. Yeah.
So you just mentioned an example of kind of explosive growth with the 30 homes. There's another story that is, I think, pretty close to home for you, and starts tragically with the Marshall Fire, rising from the ashes, quite literally, this build forward effort that's happening there. Can you describe that a little bit, and how that's impacting your work? How B.Public is involved in the rebuild?
Yeah. The Marshall Fire took out 1,000 homes.
Yeah.
In Boulder County. It's 3 different municipalities that were affected. And we were already in that community working with architects and builders. We'd actually, the month before that fire went through, we'd just done some great live events, really excited about the traction there, amazing community, and they just got devastated.
Yeah.
They're one of many communities that was seeing rising costs for new homes and existing home sales, a major shortage in housing, and then take 1,000 existing homes out of stock. It just, really painful, but an amazing, resilient community. And we're very fortunate to be working there. And one thing there are a couple of things about that fire and that community that's really powerful. One is that the utility, Xcel Energy, looked at that and said, we want to incentivize building back better. And so they have a rate scale for cash incentives to homeowners that's not based on square foot, which I think is incredible. It's per home rebuild. And there's a sliding scale from Energy Star all the way up to Passive House certification. And for a single home, the utility is offering $37,000 back to homeowners who certified a Passive House.
Yeah, that's really great.
I mean, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, because it's so powerful. But if you flip that and you think about conservation and what is conservation worth, we all think more like how is it going to affect our utility bill, or the size of solar system we need, or geothermal we need. If a utility is valuing a single home at $37,000, how powerful that is around how they need us to conserve, that they can't keep up with the demand. This grid needs to be bolstered in other ways. And one is to level out how we pull off that grid. And so with those incentives involved, and some amazing architects and builders up in Colorado, who are already, deep in high performance, these funds and this huge demand of 1,000 homes has really pushed a bunch of professionals into Passive House. So for B.Public in particular, we're working with, I think, 6 different studios that we'd never worked with before, who had never achieved Passive House before.
Yeah.
And they're all deep in it.
That's
and
awesome.
They're totally on board, and they're getting trained, and they're designing to clients, and they're working with certifiers, and they're really looking at those benchmarks. So in that case, we're a vendor, a supplier of this high performance thermal envelope. But we're also consultants to the project, much like, or sort of alongside the engineers of here's the offsite set. Here are considerations for performance, right? We can support in decision-making. We can offer what we do is we're not certifiers, but we offer all that data to their certifier, to their consultants, to get all the way there. So we're just, here's the data, you can run with it. What do you need to change? What more can we provide? So that's amazing because now there's this powerful community of professionals who are armed and ready and designing high performance for the first time in their careers, and they're all in.
You sort of are offering a little bit of an insurance policy for these folks who are doing this for the first time as well, because you're experienced at manufacturing passive house envelopes. It's that kind of the promise of prefab and how it can accelerate decarbonization kind of being realized in the real world with this rebuild, because I know there's so many projects that need to happen there, and so much learning and such steep learning curves happening all at once. Whatever we can do to kind of support that and make these projects really successful, we need to do, and you're right in the middle of it.
Well, and I have to give kudos to the homeowners.
Mm-hmm.
This community and how strong and resilient humans are to go through trauma.
Yeah.
And then to really turn it around, to make decisions, to be empowered, to build back better. I do think people experience and make decisions differently when they've lost or they've seen, home materials burn. We've also been very fortunate to help people rebuild from the CZU fire in Santa Cruz. And that fire happened a year before Marshall.
Yeah.
And so being a part of these communities and working, it really is, and it's neighbors, supporting neighbors to make better decisions. It's really amazing how close that information is held and shared. So our experience as a company designing and working with folks in Santa Cruz and now in Boulder, and unfortunately, we're also working with folks who lost homes in New Mexico. Actually, our R&D studio is in Las Vegas, New Mexico, which is right at the edge of the Hermit's Peak fire that took out many homes and a very different burn. But we're now connected to these communities who are making decisions from a very different place, and very impassioned and excited to build back better or build forward, as we're talking about in Boulder.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that story. It's really important work. So why don't we pivot a little bit and look ahead for B.Public and for prefab, and if you were to look in a crystal ball, where do you see the prefab world headed in those years, more generally, and more specifically, what do you hope to see for B.Public in the next few years?
I think there's no choice in the U.S. but to grow offsite, and I'm really excited. I'm sort of a entrepreneurial geek, and I'm really I love looking at the other companies that we're in the same swimming pool with, from the volumetric, from sort of fully finished sheds to very high-end volumetric houses, to other amazing folks in the panelized, and just in the material side of it. There's nowhere but growth for us in the US. I think, at the beginning of COVID, it was 3%, 2 to 3% of construction in residential in the US had some form of offsite. So if we get to 6% for folks like me,
yeah, that's huge.
That is huge growth.
Yeah.
If we're going to try and, solve the housing crisis and really address the resiliency for climate storms and displacement, it's going to be even bigger growth because we're going to have to meet it quickly. So I feel like there's nothing but growth in this arena. That being said, I think we have to prove the market. We have to win hearts and minds. And for B.Public, that is builders.
Mm-hmm.
And why that is hard is because, the average age on a job site right now is 47, I believe.
Wow. Yeah.
People are getting tired.
Yeah.
They're getting burnt out. They're getting exhausted by being undervalued. I mean, it's the question of square foot, and what does it really mean when you're trying to drive square foot costs down? We are devaluing the labor that builds these things that we live in. So how do we flip that switch and really talk about quality and talk about speed and security for the folks who build with us? How do we call people into the trades in a way that makes it attractive and that they can see prosperous futures and being recognized for their contribution? I think that can be done in offsite. I think having people show up to a safe place, that it doesn't rain inside, the wind isn't blowing, and they can punch in. There's a thing about building that's very unstable, and it is weather related. It's also, you have to have vehicles to get to the site. And then if the weather's lousy or the drywallers didn't show up, you got to rearrange your whole crew. So I think the stability for offsite offers some great hope in how we change, perspectives and honor how we build. For B.Public, we're very ambitious about growth. But we're also a public benefit corp. So we are a for-profit company, but we have mission baked into our company structure and our values. So this is about calling more partners in, sharing information, building more homes together. And that sometimes is hard to do. We're breaking ground in a lot of ways, Zach. Like we're trying to mix things up in so many ways. It's understandable why corporate America operates in sort of this protective zone. And we really want to lead open-heartedly and support others in this change. So that's hard. We got to stay on our toes, and we got to really be active about how we communicate and, even build contracts so that people feel like their growth is our growth.
Right.
And we all win when we all win.
Right. Right. Well, and in terms of winning the hearts and minds of builders, you maybe that's a good opportunity to talk about the NHB's International Builder Show, right? That you'll be at in a couple of weeks, right? What's that about?
With 90,000 of my new best friends. It's super cool. I mean, it's a massive show. It's totally overwhelming. It's like wear really good walking shoes and carry coffee and water. We applied, or we were invited to apply, and we were asked to come and present in the startup zone, which is totally cool. So we've got not a major booth, but we've got a kiosk, and we'll have staff there. I think there are 20 startups that are in the startup zone. I'll also get on stage and do the pitch and, talk about what we've talked about, but very quickly. I think I have 4 minutes, so wish me luck. Which is really exciting for me. It truly is 90,000 people.
Yeah.
I will be very pleased if I make 10 great new friends at this event. We know Passive House and high performance is still an outlier, although there are a lot of really cool people that are now trickling in and saying they're going to be there and that they're presenting. So it's moving into the mainstream. Certainly for offsite, it's, a little bit Wild West. But we as a B Corp, again, part of our mission is to educate and to, really ask people to reconsider and make data-driven decisions. And for a lot of the clients we work with, Zach, they're excited about, a carbon appropriate approach, but they're not thinking passive house. There are a lot of people who are just wanting to build a better house or build a better, apartment. And we're really happy to have those conversations too, because really, for all the reasons we've talked about, if we can sneak the spinach into the smoothie with a little bit of protein, we're pretty sure we're changing the world in a sneaky good way.
Right.
So if we can sneak in healthier homes or low energy to folks who just are looking for ways to build faster or better, or they really love working with wood, or you name it, a million reasons to adopt offsite. And I don't know how much we need to talk about the other stuff. We can just sneak in the spinach. Right?
Yeah.
I'm totally okay.
Yeah, no, me too. I'm glad you're doing it. And I mean, it's the passive house is a tool. It's not the end goal. It's a tool for where we all want to head. So
yeah, for us, we really do. We want to meet people. So I'm really grateful for the time here on radio with you. But we're going to be on the road a fair bit. If you're not going to be in Las Vegas, or you've heard this after the Las Vegas show,
right.
We'll be doing more of the trainings for builders, installers. Every time we can, invite people to visit a site at a project that's just gone up or is going up, and people get to cheer on the crews as they install. We like sharing that out to people. If we're in your community, we really want to share this information, not just about B.Public, although happy to share about B.Public, but we just want to share that there's good news, that there's cool stuff happening.
Yeah.
And it's not scary. It's stuff that we all, again, we all played with those building blocks. We all know that sort of behavior of stacking and building and how satisfying. We just do it at a bigger scale. And so we like to share it when we can. So stay in touch, watch us. We're coming to your town soon. If we're not, just reach out.
Well said. Thanks, Edie.
Thanks, Zach.
And that was Edie Dillman of B.Public, and she's a busy person. She's also doing a lot. I hadn't appreciated just how much she's got going on in the art world, as well as the work that she does with Passive House and her own practice.
Yeah, she's doing some good work supporting artists and their practice. Yeah,
and the word disruption came up, and I get. It's not just art for the sake of art, although she's obviously got a passion for that, but also very interested in those topics that she talked about that were the themes of residencies, the immigration, food equity, labor, and then, of course, the concept of disruption. So there's a real strong social responsibility theme underlying all of that, and I think that comes through to her work in Passive House as well, beyond just being a really great entrepreneur and building a successful business. Perhaps that is a result of her underlying desire to do good in the world and to provide solutions for things, as you mentioned, towards the end there, providing great solutions for getting houses up quickly where they were needed after big events. And we're talking about that before the interview about the need for us to respond to catastrophic events and housing. Providing good housing after that is one of those needs, but also providing housing that's going to be more resilient and adapting to changing climate.
Well, and I think we talked about with floods needing to really consider retreat. And of course, that can also be true of the zone, between urban areas and forests. But there's also an opportunity to really actually create buildings that are resilient to wildfire and wildfire smoke. And there are some great natural ways that Passive House can help do that, because Passive House is airtight, and provide, you can do filtered fresh air into these homes. So that helps to avoid smoke damage. So there's a real, I think, hopeful quality to the project of rebuilding it from the Marshall Fire.
Yeah. Because getting those up fast is key to that, but not getting them up, not getting things just fast. Because often you have the sort of project management sort of paradigm of you want things cheaply, fast, and good quality, but you can't have all three at the same time.
Right. You can have two of them, not all three. Right.
Yeah. But Passive House does provide that opportunity to get something up quickly if you have the system set up to do that, and the product can be really, really good because of the robustness. I'm really intrigued. This is one of the first instances I've heard about this, but probably because I've never really thought it through that well. The idea of individual panels being resilient on their own. Often a prefabrication system relies on the connection and the taping between the joints, and then maybe possibly wrapping the building over the top of all of those panels. But going back to the beginning, Edie talked about she was very precise on the 5 sides of a panel. And we often think of a panel as sort of having 2 main sides, the outside and the inside, but it's got depth. It's a 3-dimensional thing. It's got all those edges as well. And I thought that was a really sensible idea, knowing that firstly your panel is going to move from the factory to the building site, and they get bumped around on a truck, and it's wood. It's a natural product, so they're not perfectly rigid. But then over the life of the building, things are going to move as well. So if you have that extra level of integrity and resilience in the individual panels, then that looks after the structure more than just relying on the whole building wrap.
Yeah, I didn't expect that answer, and it made total sense when she brought it up. And it was this, right, the sensibility of each of these panels having their own little life that they're going to live between the factory and the site, and then once they're put together. So of course it makes sense to do five sides when you think of it that way.
Yeah. And I love the fact that she quoted the figure there, 80% post-consumer recycled product for, I think that was for insulation specifically, but always seeking to think about the whole picture of where resources are coming from and which resources are the best ones to be used, but also not being completely wedded to that solution, because it may not be the best solution in the future. And what is the fixed point is the performance and the outcome of how that building should work. But how to achieve that may adapt over time. And I thought that was a really useful idea of thinking about how we build and focusing on performance, but being able to adjust how we get there. Because I think sometimes we flip that around a little bit, and builders and even designers are guilty of just doing things the way they've always been done, without necessarily being open to new ways of doing things.
That's a good point. I mean, people who are doing prefab in Passive House, these are they're innovators. They've got to be, and they're continuing to, what's the verb, but kind of chip away or ideate around how to solve this problem of prefabrication in a way that will hopefully realize the promise of being able to really scale up fast, and effectively. So Yeah, it's a good observation, and I think it's natural that you'd see that kind of sensibility from somebody like Edie, who is engaging in this. Like, it's not just they're not just tackling passive house. That's a big enough task on its own, but they're tackling how to completely reimagine how we approach construction, and how to make that happen and achieve the economies of scale with the factory and all that stuff, which is super exciting. And we need these innovators to succeed, because it would, there is that promise, and it would be great to really fully realize that. I mean, there are already so many, I think, benefits that they're realizing with the quality of construction and the speed of things can happen on site, and all of those. And if you then also can combine that with the cost curves that we see in other mass-produced elements of the clean energy transition, like solar panels and wind turbines, then we could really see a step jump in this, this transition we need to see happen so fast.
I also love that she's taking on the role of educating tradespeople and builders, realizing that a builder probably hasn't learnt to build a house using panels. They've been taught other methods. So taking on that responsibility, recognizing that there's not necessarily a defined pathway for builders to become builders of or installers or assemblers of prefabricated panelized homes, and recognizing that gap and then filling that gap is, I guess, typical of an entrepreneur like herself, but it's really good to see happen. Yeah, true. Very good stuff. Exciting. I love that combination of prefabrication, particularly in that panel format, and and moving towards passive house and everything that comes along with that. I think it's really exciting stuff. So thank you for doing that, and thank you to Edie's work. We'll carry on watching that, and she's got some great videos on Public Prefab website, so B.Publicprefab.com, but you can also find Edie through various social channels with all of her other work and involvement in the Santa Fe Art Institute and other places that she's involved in as well. All right. What have we got coming up, Zach?
Well, at the Accelerator, we have the next episode of our Passive House Accelerator live series. It's going to be our Next Gen episode. So this is one that the Next Gen series is featuring the next generation of practitioners who are shaping the future of building. And we just kicked off our first one last month. So this one is on February 8th for us in North America, and super early for you on February 9th in New Zealand and Australia. And it will be featuring Heather McKinstry of Datner Architects, who will be presenting Scale, Exploring the Extents of Passive House. And then the week after, on February 15th, we will have a project showcase episode of Passive House Accelerator Live featuring Scott Wybar and Skylar Swinford, who will be presenting the Fifth Street Passive House modeled and measured performance. So this is a single family passive house in Boise, Idaho. And then in the Passive House world, there are a couple of big events coming up very soon. The International Passive House Conference put on by Passive House Institute will be in Wiesbaden, Germany on March 10th and 11th. And Matthew and I will both be there. So we hope that some listeners will also be there. It'd be great to say hello. It's very exciting. We are going to be co-host with Passive House Institute of the exhibition, the Passive House exhibition party that will happen on the Friday of the conference. And that is being underwritten by Rotho Blas USA. So a big thank you to Rotho Blas for their generous support of that party. We're also going to be doing a bunch of Passive House podcast interviews while we're at the conference. So even if you're not able to make it to the conference, you'll be able to hear from some of the thought leaders who will be presenting there. And I know Matthew is going to be doing a bunch of those interviews, Mary James as well. Ilka Cassidy will also be doing those. Those are underwritten by special sponsors for that series: Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, Innotech Windows, and Proclima. So a big thank you to those fine businesses for helping us out with that. And then later in March is the FIAS Retrofit Summit. So the FIAS will be doing this Retrofit Summit on March 21st and 23rd. So this is available virtually, virtual FIAS Summit. And so that's a Tuesday and Thursday from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern. Passive House Accelerator will be also participating on the Wednesday, March 22nd. We'll be doing our own installment of the summit, and that's going to be focused on prefabrication and retrofits, panelization specifically. So we'll share some information about that in the show notes. And of course, there's lots of other stuff going on in our world that we cover in our newsletter. So we'll include a link to that.
Yep, definitely sign up for that. Get all the information. Super exciting stuff there. That's really great content. That retrofits and using panelization prefabrication for retrofitting. That's super exciting stuff. And of course, at the time this is released, it's about a month away, 4.5 weeks to that Passive House conference. So super exciting, getting over there and visiting our European friends. So like you said, I hope some other people will join us there as well.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
But if not, for those that want to live vicariously, we will be trying to get as much of that great content out as we can and share it with the world. I'm going to go and see what needs drying out here. And
good luck with that.
Thank you for this week's episode. Really enjoyed it. Thank you all to our listeners. We'll be back again next week on Passive House Podcast.